Hiya, Frank. Would you like to be a part of history?
Yes, I would.
Big business and the government are working together, trying to pull us apart. Something's got to be done.
What else you say? Now's not the time to not say.
Hey guys, it's Sean O'Connell, the managing director here at CinemaBlend, and I am reviewing Martin Scorsese's new film, The Irishman, for you. I'm going to call it spoiler-free because it's not the kind of movie that you can spoil. There's no major twists, but I'm going to have to get into some details. So if you don't want to know anything at all about The Irishman, you might want to back out right now. But listen, go see it. It's really, really great. I'm going to tell you why it's so great in the video right now. But before we do that, do me a favor, go down and hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, because every time we post a video like this on CinemaBlend's YouTube page, we want you to come over and watch it right away. The first thing I want to point out about Martin Scorsese's The Irishman is that the director is trying to tell an epic story that spans decades in this film. That's why I tell you it's really hard to kind of spoil, because there's so much going on with a lot of major characters coming and going throughout it that it's not like if I told you one particular thing, you'd be like, oh, I know the whole movie. Believe me, you don't. It focuses primarily on one main character. His name is Frank Sheeran, and he's played by Robert De Niro in this film. It's Scorsese really biting off a huge chunk of history as he follows these characters through multiple decades over the course of what becomes one of his iconic gangster films. And in order to map out who these characters are, he has to trace them through several different developments of where they go. Like when we start with Frank Sheeran, he's a young truck driver who's trying to get his way into the unions of the Northeast, the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area of the country. And over the course of becoming a member of the union, he, of course, crosses paths with Teamster boss Jimmy Hoffa. These relationships are going to become really, really complicated, and Scorsese lets them play out and lets history sort of dictate where these guys are going to go. It's kind of the tale of how America was shaped by the Teamsters, how America was influenced by the mobsters, and then Scorsese puts his own sort of insights into the previous movies that he made, but comes to some natural conclusions over the course of The Irishman, which just makes this, the only way to say it is, it's an epic, epic story that covers a lot of ground and is never anything less than totally fascinating. But because this is a mobster film, you kind of want to know how it compares to the previous iconic installments in the gangster movie franchise, and I'm here to tell you that Scorsese's The Irishman stands shoulder to shoulder with Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather Part 1 and Part 2. The movie truly is that good, and I know Marty has made two unbelievably great gangster films in Goodfellas and Casino, and people have kind of been wanting him to go back to that genre and explore those type of characters. And once they found out that he was reteaming with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci to go back into the gangster world, they assumed that he might be able to reach the levels attained in Goodfellas and Casino. And I know people talk about The Departed also, but that was a DiCaprio, Jack Nicholson, Matt Damon deal, and to me didn't quite reach the levels that Scorsese was attaining when he did Goodfellas and Casino. But The Irishman goes one step above those, in my opinion, and I know that that's saying a lot. While Goodfellas really, bathed in the criminal lifestyle of its characters, what The Irishman does is go one step further and sort of reflect the way that Scorsese has been doing recently in his films like Silence on what the consequences of people's actions are. Yes, he gets down and dirty with the mobsters that are featured in Irishman, but he also takes that one step back to almost analyze how their violent actions influence their psyche and weighed on them later on in their lives. And I think that that's a really important part of where the director is right now as a storyteller, and it makes The Irishman a better movie because of it. I understand it's a little bit blasphemous to say that any movie might reach a level of Godfather 1 and 2, but honestly, if I'm telling you that Martin Scorsese has made a gangster film with De Niro, Pesci, and Pacino, and it's on par with Godfather 1 and 2, you can kind of believe it just because of the talent that Scorsese brings, the type of storyteller that he is, and the genre that he's operating in. It's a movie that he's made for, with a cast that is perfect for him. And yeah, believe me, take my word for it, it's as good as Godfather 1 and 2. Speaking of that cast that Scorsese has put together for The Irishman, they are all iconic actors, particularly for the genre, and they are all operating at the top of their game. It's pretty easy to forget that Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, and even Pesci to a certain extent, were capable of delivering these weighty, dramatic, gut-punching performances because they've made some lazy choices. You know, De Niro would show up in that Dirty Grandpa movie with Zac Efron, and Pacino would do an Adam Sandler film every once in a while.
What's my name? Dunkachino. It's a whole new game. Dunkachino.
You know, they're not quite paycheck roles, but they're beneath what these guys are capable of doing. And it's very possible that they've not been given the opportunity to sink their teeth into material like this, and it took a story like The Irishman to get them back together. But watching these actors dive into the script that Martin Scorsese gives them for The Irishman was so rewarding and so uplifting, especially Pacino. To me, Pacino is the standout in an incredible ensemble. And that's not to take anything away from what De Niro and Pesci do also. I got goosebumps the first time I saw De Niro and Pesci sharing a scene together. Like, it was just great to see them back together in a gangster film. But what Al Pacino is able to do as Jimmy Hoffa, he turns him into a tragic figure that is on par with the work that he did as Michael in the Godfather films. He understands how to play a character who is being influenced by much larger forces that he's unable to control necessarily. It's his destiny to sort of go down certain roads as Hoffa, and he knows that, like, you know, he can't back down from what life is sending his way, but he also can't not keep going forward, right? It's a fascinating sort of crossroads that the character is always at, and Pacino understands exactly how to play it.
You always charge a guy with a gun. With a knife, you run away. So you charge with a gun, with a knife, you run.
De Niro has looked disengaged in a couple of his performances. Like, he's there, but he's not necessarily getting into the soul of the character. Well, he owns Frank Sheeran in this movie. And colleagues have been saying, and I totally agree with it, it's all in his eyes. It's a performance that's done completely in his eyes. He shows such sorrow, and the tragedy of the decisions that he's making really reflect heavily in his performance. It's extremely dramatic. Like, I understand that people are saying that at 3.5 hours, maybe the film can feel a little bit long. To me, it feels like a 90-minute film. I mean, it goes by that quickly because you're so engrossed in the story and you're so caught up in the performances. I cannot say enough about the cast that Scorsese has put together. Again, I'm not breaking any news here to tell you that Pacino and De Niro and Pesci are amazing in a gangster film directed by Martin Scorsese, but it bears repeating that this cast is just spectacular, and I loved everything that they were doing on screen. I also want to say that part of the reason why I think The Irishman is so good is because it's the type of story that Scorsese could only tell right now because of who he is. And this is what makes it different from Goodfellas or Casino or something that he made when he was a younger storyteller, a younger filmmaker. This is a director who's now in his mid-70s, and especially as reflected in the movie Silence, which he did right before this, he's become very contemplative about where he's going in the later stages of his life. None of us are going to last forever, and as Scorsese is getting a little bit closer to his older ages, he's thinking a lot about his legacy, and he's thinking a lot about what happens to us in the afterlife. There's no surprise that Scorsese is a deeply Catholic person, and he uses his faith repeatedly to explore characters in his stories, and even go so far as to make a film like The Last Temptation of Christ, which is a standout for Scorsese as well, too. But because of that reflection, it allows, as I mentioned earlier, this picture to go to a third act that I don't think Scorsese would have been able to do earlier in his career, which is to not only follow these characters through all their violent swings in the life that they have built for themselves through organized crime, but to almost step back and think like, well, what does this mean? Like, what have my actions over the course of my life meant to me? How did it affect my family? How did it affect my relationship with the church? How is it affecting me internally? These are big questions that Scorsese is asking and even attempting to answer in The Irishman, which I find really fascinating because he can be a deeply philosophical filmmaker, but he never loses sight of these questions enhancing the story in general. He doesn't get lost in these big questions. He pulls them into the fabric of the story. And I think it's just really exciting to see him still, you know, in his mid-70s, tackling really difficult material like this and wrestling with how it makes him feel, how it makes these characters feel. If Scorsese tried to do this 10 years ago, I think Irishman would have been a different film and maybe not quite as good of a film as it ends up being. So where does that leave us? I am actually going to tell you that The Irishman is the best movie that I've seen on screen this year. It is a 5-star movie. It has blown me away. I cannot wait to go see it again. Now, if you pay any sort of attention to the reviews that I put here on CinemaBlend, you might know that I was calling Avengers Endgame my favorite movie of all time. Not just of this year, but of all time. And I want to sort of clarify that I still think Avengers Endgame is my favorite movie of all time. That doesn't mean that I can't recognize that The Irishman is a better made film. No filmmaker right now is attempting to make a movie on a level of The Irishman. And only Scorsese, I think, would have the confidence and the curiosity in the material to go after a story like this. But when you realize the scope of the story that he's trying to tell and how much he's fitting into this 3.5-hour runtime, it's truly staggering that he's able to maintain such a firm grasp on all of these characters and this story. It is a masterful piece of storytelling. I cannot see in November catching another film between now and the end of the year that's going to be anywhere close to being as good as The Irishman. So I'm very confident in telling you that this is the best movie I've seen in 2019 and one of the better films I've seen in the past decade. I might even want to put it into like top 5 Martin Scorsese movies of all time. It's early. I want to see it again, but it's A-list Scorsese, and if you are excited by that, run to the theaters and see The Irishman as soon as you can. What more do you guys need from me? I'm telling you, it's 5 stars out of 5. It's perfection. It's Martin Scorsese at the top of his game. Go to the theaters right now. See The Irishman. Don't wait for it to reach Netflix. Find it in a movie theater somewhere. If you have managed to see Irishman somehow, because it is playing in a few theaters now and is going to be expanding over the next couple of weeks, go down in the comment section and tell me what you thought. Am I completely wrong, or do you agree with me that this stands shoulder to shoulder with Godfather Part 1 and Part 2? I want to hear from you. In addition, I want you to go down and hit subscribe if you haven't yet. And while you're at it, turn on your notifications, because every time we post a video like this on our YouTube page, we want you to come over and watch it right away.